So this is 3.2 perception, and the objective for today is to discuss how experience and culture can influence the perceptual process. So we talked about yesterday about what perception was, and this is focusing a little bit more on how your own experiences impact your perception. Again, then relating in how we behave. Perceptual interpretation, how do we interpret perception? Well, first we have to think about perceptual adaptation and our ability to adapt to changes in our visual input. So think like drunk goggles. If you put the drunk goggles on at first, you seem really out of whack, but within a little bit of time, you will learn to adapt to that. So this is how you can learn to adapt and interpret that sense. Perceptual set is the mental predisposition based on experiences and schemas. So if the way that you organize and interpret information, so this is going to be a little bit like, for example, you think milk is white. So if we tell you that milk is green, that may impact your perceptual set. You don't want to drink green milk. Context effects is the idea that context can influence context can influence perception. Things like listening to happy or sad music can influence you. Emotion and motivation. Perception is influenced top down by our emotions or by our motivation. So think back to the other lesson when we talked about top down and bottom up. So if you have a specific emotion, that can influence your perception on something. For example, a hill might seem a lot steeper if you have a really heavy backpack. Oh, sorry, I want to go back to the slide for just a second. Take a look to the chart off to your right-hand side. Perception is a biopsychosocial phenomenon. Essentially, your version of reality is because of a variety of different things. So perception is happening because your biological influences, so this is your sensations, your unlearned information, just your basic information that you're getting. Psychological influences, this is selective attention, schemas, gestalt, context. And then your social and cultural influences also have a role or play a role in your perception. Your schemas. I like to think of schemas as file folders in your brain. Schemas are concepts that organize and interpret unfamiliar information. So you have schemas in your mind for everything. And whenever you incorporate or whenever you encounter something new, you look to see where that can fit into a schema. So if you have a new experience at school, you kind of look at your school schemas and see, okay, this new experience, where would I fit this into? Children have this really kind of unique ability to represent reality, as well as our abilities to represent what they see or how they interpret it. So if we take a look at this like amazing little picture here, of what we got of Adam and Eve, right? We have Adam and Eve, and there's a snake. I don't know if you can see the snake down in the bottom left. Right here is our little snake. And I'm assuming these are the apples from the tree. Context effects. We talked a little bit about this in the last slide, but just kind of reiterate it. Context effects can radically alter your perception and how you view something. So, for example, this image right here is the magician cabinet on the floor. So is this the bottom right here is on the floor? Or is it hanging from the ceiling? So is this part right here attached to the ceiling and then hanging down? Woohoo! Sorry, team. There we go. We can also apply this to school, right? Context effects in schools is you'll recall information better if you're in the same context that you learned the information. So if you, for example, take a test in the same room that you learned the information, you're likely to do better on that exam. Cultural context also plays a role. And this is when context instilled by a culture can also alter your perception. So for example, they showed this picture to both Eastern and to Western cultures, so like to European and American cultures, and then to an East African culture. And they asked them to describe what they saw. In East African cultures, they would say that they envisioned the woman who's sitting here on this sofa to have some sort of a metal box on her head, or have some sort of something on her head that she was balancing, and that the family is sitting under a tree, this being the tree right here. When asked this question for Western cultures, they said that she was sitting underneath a window, and that this was just a pole in a room, or some sort of, just part of the room that they're sitting in. Now, part of what explains this is because of the Muller-Lyer illusion. And this illusion is what impacts Western cultures, because we tend to live in homes and buildings with rectangles and lines. So if you look back here, this would be, rectangles, straight lines. This is very much a Western culture phenomenon to have windows with these perfect edges and lines. That's not the case in all cultures of the world. So they don't see windows like that. So the Muller-Lyer illusion says that in most Western cultures, if you ask which line out of these three lines is the longest, most Western cultures are going to say the center line, that this line is actually longer than the other lines. Well, that's not true. They're all the same length, right? So that is the Muller-Lyer illusion. Now you can probably, as you see this happening, sorry, it's on repeat, the Ponzo illusion off here to the side. If I were to ask you which line is longer, the first yellow line or the second yellow line, most people say the second yellow line. But as you can see by the two red lines coming down, they're the exact same length. And this is the Ponzo illusion, the fact that if you depending on how you draw the surroundings, can alter what you think that the length of the line is. Selective attention is your ability to focus on a particular conversation in a noisy and crowded room. So if you're at a party and somebody's talking, the fact that you can hear what they're saying is called selective attention. You might be able to hear them say your name. We can call this the cocktail party effect, which allows you to focus on one thing when there are other things going on around you, or allows you to hear your name in a crowded room. You may also say this is the reason why you don't, quote unquote, hear your parents calling your name, that your attention is focused elsewhere, so you don't hear the distracting noise or the background noise of your parent calling your name. Selective inattention is what we call unintentional blindness, where you miss something completely, or change blindness. You miss something that changes. And I'm going to show you two examples of this in just a moment. Here we have unintentional blindness. Okay, I'm sure many of you have seen this video before, this unintentional blindness video. If not, you can Google it. The Simmons and Chabris 1999 video. They play the video. They ask people to focus on how many times the ball is being passed. So you can't see it right here, but they're passing a ball back and forth. And so as participants are watching this happen, they count the ball being passed, and they don't notice the monkey or the person in the monkey suit come and stand in the middle and then run off to the side. And this is because you're focused on something, so you miss something completely. That's what we call unintentional mindset, or unintentional blindness. Change blindness, a very similar study being done. Again, you can look this up and find it on YouTube. What we call change blindness. And it's in a form of inattentional blindness in which 2/3 of the individuals giving directions fail to notice a change in the individual asking for directions. So as you see, the person on the left comes up, asks for directions. Somebody walks by with something large in the middle of them, and then a new person is asking directions, and 2/3 of the individual didn't even notice that it was a new person. And that's considered change blindness. Motion perception. So in our last lesson, we talked about monocular and binocular depth cues. So how we can understand depth based off of one eye with monocular depth cues. Another type of perception is motion perception. And this is where you can detect motion, different ways that you can detect motion or you perceive motion from happening. The first one we'll call phi phenomenon, or stroboscopic movement. You need to know both of those names because you'll see both of them come up. And this is what a flip book is like. So if you take a bunch of pictures and you move through them really fast and it makes it seem like the person is running or moving, I'm sure you've done this with a stick figure at a time or two. And these are flip books. The second is relative motion. And this is when we're moving. So think about if you're in a car, if you're sitting in the car with somebody and you guys start to drive. And it seems like objects like a lamp post or a stop sign that is stationary, that is fixed, you know it isn't moving, but yet at the same time it seems like it's moving because you're the one moving. That's relative motion. And then motion parallax is when you are moving. So again, you're sitting in a passenger in the car and you are moving. The nearby objects seem to go by super fast, but the distant objects go by very slowly. So, for example, a cityscape or a scene of a city, as you're coming up upon it, seems to be moving very slowly towards you, versus the rocks on the side of the road are going by very quickly. And that's it for this. So this is perception. So this is how we take that sensory information and we process it and how we make sense of things that are happening around us.